And this could even include the use of the military on the streets of Canada, with Trudeau even saying, everything is on the table. So to think it's a stretch to call this police state or authoritarian or martial law style legislation, that's completely incorrect. That's absolutely what this is. So Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has just implemented the country's Emergencies Act for the first time in the country's history in response to the Freedom Convoy trucker protests that have been going on for weeks now. But is this really anything but an admission of defeat? I'm Stuart Hooper, a lecturer in political science and PhD researcher, approaching these political problems not from the left, not from the right, but from a position of right versus wrong, and trying to determine the real power structure that underlies any given situation, who's winning, who's losing, and why that is happening. So the truckers in the Freedom Convoy have essentially shut down large portions of Canadian society for the past few weeks now. This has, of course, been an immense inconvenience to a lot of people. It has put more strain on supply chains. It's potentially threatening to damage an economy that is already extremely strained internationally and within Canada. But this is an example of real civil disobedience having a real impact on society. And it's following the blueprint that the civil rights movement followed in the United States in the 50s and the 60s, which also produced a very real set of social and political outcomes that went in favor of the protesters. These truckers are certainly not weekend warriors, the kind of people that you'll find outside of government buildings on a Saturday or a Sunday, screaming and shouting at what is essentially an empty building on the weekend. Is there some positive to doing that? Maybe. But are you actually going to have your voice heard? Are you going to have a real impact? Probably not. And we see that the truckers have had a series of significant victories. Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec all rolling back their mandates, all beginning to rescind all of the restrictions that they had placed on their societies as a result of the virus. Also, these protests have begun to spread internationally, from places as far spread as Argentina, Austria, Cyprus, New Zealand, Australia, United States, United Kingdom. This has become a global protest movement. Very similar to what happened with Black Lives Matter now a couple of years ago. Extremely interesting. How has the Prime Minister of Canada responded to this? Well, with defiance and with what I would determine to be defeat. This is showing that you are defeated, that you have nowhere else to go aside from turning Canadian society into a police state by enacting the Emergencies Act for the first time in the country's history. So let's take a look at exactly what that is and the reaction of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association to this particular instance of what it has deemed to be government overreach of the highest order. So remember, this Emergencies Act has never before been enacted in Canada. It's supposed to be done for one of these four scenarios: espionage or sabotage, foreign influence activities, threats or use of acts of serious violence for political, religious, or ideological objectives, covert, unlawful acts intended to undermine or overthrow the constitutionally elected government. It is so far unclear which scenario Mr. Trudeau would rely on to justify the use of the Emergency Act. None of these four scenarios have been clearly present in Ontario. And what could we see here? Well, apparently a number of far-reaching powers The government could bar travel to or from specific areas, from Parliament Hill or major border crossings, for example. It could order the evacuation of people and personal property from certain areas, possibly using this power to clear out congested areas of protesters. And it could direct individuals and companies to render essential services, perhaps ordering tow truck companies to lend their services and clear the roads of demonstrators and their vehicles. And this could even include the use of the military on the streets of Canada, with Trudeau even saying, everything is on the table. So to think it's a stretch to call this police state or authoritarian or martial law style legislation, that's completely incorrect. That's absolutely what this is. And if we need some proof of that, beyond what could happen, private companies being forced to work for the government, for instance, military on the streets, police directing people where they can and cannot go in their day-to-day lives, well, let's take a look at what the Canadian Civil Liberties Association has had to say about this very decision. The federal government has not met the threshold necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act. This law creates a high and clear standard for good reason. The Act allows government to bypass ordinary democratic processes. This standard has not been met. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under other laws of Canada. Governments regularly deal with difficult situations, and do so using powers granted to them by democratically elected representatives. Emergency legislation should not be normalized. It threatens our democracy and our civil liberties. So in the academic world, this is what we would call securitization, turning something, an issue, a problem, into a security threat. Why would a government do this? Well, because it allows them to do things like this, to enact emergency legislation, to do things without asking you, the people, or the government of elected representatives, whether or not it should be done, because if it's not done, the security threat is going to be the end of the world, people are going to get hurt, people are going to die. Think of the children, think of 9/11, think of everything that could possibly go wrong if we do not take these actions immediately for our peace and security. Now, I'm sure those of you watching this channel and those of you this far into this video understand that we should be extremely critical of any such claim. That is extremely dangerous, that we need to do this without debate, without discussion, simply because it's intending to keep everybody safe. This is what we could call the root cause of many historical nightmares. So while I'm definitely not saying that this is absolutely going to be another historical nightmare in Canada, this is another example of a Western democracy that's supposed to be a haven of classical liberal values, everything that revolves around this ideal of freedom, working in completely the opposite direction. So if you are genuinely concerned and serious about living in a free society, now is the time to start asking questions, and now is the time to start raising red flags and demand answers from the leadership. Why specifically are you doing this? On what grounds can you justify overriding democratic processes for this particular situation? Is that really necessary? Particularly when, it's actually supposed to be a democracy, and you're supposed to solve problems in a democracy via communication. Has Trudeau tried that? I don't think so. So I'll be keeping an eye on this Canadian situation, as what is going on over in Ukraine seems to be dying down somewhat, thankfully. Please subscribe if you've made it all the way through to the end of this video. Hit the notification bell. You can follow me on other social media platforms at the links below. Really appreciate the growth in my channel, which I'm slowly but surely getting. Would like to get myself into a position of a louder voice here on YouTube. Kind of got a little small voice going on right now, but I'm reaching more people here on a weekly basis than I would just in my classrooms, and I consider that a victory. Being able to talk to you guys, think about issues on a critical level that really isn't being done anywhere else, particularly in mainstream media. But even in alternative media, there's a lot of channels that are on the left, a lot of channels that are on the right. I think we need to carve out a new niche here. We need to reject these ideological prisons and think critically of everything that we possibly can. So thank you guys for making it to the end of this clip. I'll be back with more real soon.